The gavel fell with a sound that shattered my world. My 12-year-old son Tommy stood up in that sterile courtroom, looked directly at Judge Patricia Roberts, and declared with a voice that didn't even waver, "I want to live with my dad and Amanda." The words hit me like a freight train. 7 months of legal battles, sleepless nights, and everything I had sacrificed as a single mother came crashing down in that single moment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The courtroom erupted in whispers. My ex-husband David smirked with satisfaction, and his new wife Amanda actually had the audacity to wipe away a fake tear of joy. But what my son whispered to the judge 30 seconds later would expose a truth so devastating that it would turn this entire custody battle on its head. My name is Jessica Miller, and until 8 months ago, I thought I understood my life. I had been married to David Miller for 14 years before our divorce was finalized last spring. We had what I believed was a solid marriage, built on mutual respect and shared dreams of raising our son Tommy in a loving home. David worked as a successful real estate developer in Springfield County, Ohio, while I managed the marketing department at Creative Solutions downtown. We lived in a modest but comfortable house on Elm Street, and Tommy was thriving at Lincoln Elementary School. The first crack in our foundation appeared on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday evening in February. I had just returned from picking up Tommy from soccer practice when I noticed David's car wasn't in the driveway. This wasn't unusual since his work often kept him late, but something felt different that night. Tommy went straight to his room to do homework, and I busied myself, preparing dinner, expecting David to walk through the door at any moment with his usual tired smile and stories about difficult clients. Instead, my phone buzzed with a text message that would change everything. The message was simple and cold. "Working late again. Don't wait up. There's leftover pizza in the fridge for Tommy." No explanation, no warmth, just instructions delivered. Like I was his assistant, rather than his wife. I stared at that message for several minutes, trying to understand why it felt so wrong. David had sent similar messages before, but this one carried a finality that made my stomach churn. Over the next few weeks, these late nights became more frequent. David would leave early in the morning before Tommy and I were awake, and return after we had already gone to bed. When I tried to address the distance growing between us, he would brush off my concerns with explanations about a major development project that required his constant attention. He spoke about investors, permits, and construction deadlines with an enthusiasm that seemed forced, as if he were reciting lines from a script he had memorized. The project he referenced was supposed to be a luxury housing development called Willow Creek, located on the outskirts of Springfield County. David claimed it was the biggest opportunity of his career, one that would secure our family's financial future for decades to come. He painted vivid pictures of the life we would build once this project was complete: a larger house, better schools for Tommy, and maybe even a vacation home by the lake. His eyes would light up when he talked about these dreams, but I noticed he never quite met my gaze when he spoke. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the man I had fallen in love with 15 years earlier was simply working hard to provide for his family. David had always been ambitious, and his drive was one of the qualities that had initially attracted me to him. During our early years together, I had admired his determination to build something meaningful, to create stability for the family we planned to have. But this felt different, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was building something that didn't include me. Tommy began to notice the changes too, though he expressed his confusion in the innocent way that 12-year-olds do. During one of our evening homework sessions, he looked up from his math problems and asked, "Mom, why doesn't Dad come to my games anymore?" The question caught me off guard because I hadn't realized that David's absences had extended beyond our home life. I checked Tommy's soccer schedule and confirmed what my son had observed. David hadn't attended a single game in over a month. When I confronted David about missing Tommy's activities, he responded with irritation rather than concern. "I'm working 16-hour days to build something for this family," he snapped, his voice carrying an edge I had rarely heard before. "Tommy will understand when he's older that sometimes sacrifices have to be made." The conversation ended there, with David retreating to his home office and closing the door with deliberate force. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and listening to the sound of David typing on his laptop in the room below. The clicking of keys continued until well past midnight, and I found myself wondering what could possibly require such intense focus at that hour. Real estate development involved contracts and planning, but most of that work happened during normal business hours. The late-night sessions felt secretive, almost clandestine, and my imagination began to fill in the gaps that David's explanations had left open. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning in early March. Tommy had a soccer tournament that was particularly important to him. His team had made it to the championship game for their age group, and he had been talking about it for weeks. David had promised to attend, marking the date on our family calendar with a red pen and assuring Tommy that nothing would keep him away. I packed snacks and brought folding chairs, expecting to sit with David on the sidelines and cheer for our son together. David never showed up. I called his phone repeatedly, but each call went straight to voicemail. I texted him updates about the game, hoping he was simply running late due to traffic or an unexpected work emergency. Tommy kept looking toward the parking lot between plays, scanning the faces of arriving parents for his father. When his team won the championship and Tommy received his first-place medal, the joy on his face was mixed with disappointment that his dad wasn't there to share the moment. After the tournament, Tommy and I went to celebrate at his favorite ice cream shop downtown. As we sat in a corner booth sharing a chocolate sundae, Tommy asked the question that broke my heart. "Mom, does Dad still love us?" The innocence in his voice, combined with the genuine confusion in his eyes, made me realize that David's behavior was affecting our son far more than I had understood. I assured Tommy that his father loved him very much and was simply going through a busy period at work. But the words felt hollow, even as I spoke them. That evening, when David finally returned home around 10 o'clock, I confronted him about missing the tournament. His response revealed a callousness that I had never seen before. "It's just a kid's game, Jessica," he said dismissively, not even looking up from his phone as he spoke. "Tommy will play hundreds of games over the years. Missing one isn't going to traumatize him." The casual way he dismissed something so important to our son made me realize that the man I had married was disappearing before my eyes. I pressed him for an explanation about where he had been all day, and David's story began to unravel under scrutiny. He claimed to have been at a construction site meeting with investors, but when I asked for details, his answers became vague and contradictory. He mentioned meeting with people whose names I had never heard before, discussing aspects of the project that didn't align with what he had told me previously. Most tellingly, when I asked why his phone had been turned off all day, he claimed there had been no cell service at the site, despite the fact that the Willow Creek development was located less than 20 miles from downtown Springfield County, an area with excellent cellular coverage. The lies were piling up, and I could no longer ignore the evidence that David was living a double life. I began to pay closer attention to the small details that had previously escaped my notice. His clothes carried unfamiliar scents, perfumes that I didn't wear, and restaurant aromas from places we had never visited together. His phone, which had once been carelessly left on counters and tables, was now constantly by his side, face down, and always on silent mode. Most significantly, his laptop had acquired a password that he had never felt the need to use before. I started documenting these changes, not because I was planning anything specific, but because I needed to make sense of what was happening to my marriage. I kept a small notebook where I recorded David's comings and goings, the excuses he made for his absences, and the inconsistencies in his stories. The pattern that emerged was damning. David was methodically removing himself from our family life while constructing an elaborate fiction to justify his behavior. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Rachel Stone, my best friend since college, worked as a paralegal at a law firm that handled real estate transactions throughout Springfield County. During one of our weekly coffee meetings at Rosewood Cafe, she mentioned that her firm had been tracking the Willow Creek development project because several of their clients were potential investors. When I mentioned that David was the lead developer on the project, Rachel's expression changed from casual interest to confused concern. "Jessica," she said carefully, "I've seen all the documents related to Willow Creek, and David's name isn't on any of them. The project is being developed by Henderson and Associates, and they've been working on it for over 2 years. Are you sure David is involved with this particular development?" Her words hit me like a physical blow, and I felt the last piece of my denial crumble away. That night, I waited until David was asleep before carefully searching through his home office. I found contracts and correspondence, but none of it related to any housing development. Instead, I discovered evidence of something far more personal and devastating. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Hidden in a folder marked insurance documents were restaurant receipts, hotel bookings, and even photographs that told the story of David's secret life. The woman in the photographs was beautiful in a conventional way, blonde, petite, and young, much younger than me. The receipts showed a pattern of expensive dinners and weekend getaways that had been occurring for months, possibly longer. Most devastating of all were the hotel registrations, which showed that David had been booking rooms for 2 people during times when he had told me he was working late or attending business meetings. I sat in David's office until dawn, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal, and tried to process the complete collapse of everything I had believed about my life. The man I had trusted with my heart, my future, and my son's well-being had been methodically deceiving me while I defended him to Tommy and made excuses for his behavior to our friends and family. The depth of the deception was breathtaking, and I realized that David hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been planning his exit from our marriage while keeping me in the dark about his intentions. When David woke up that morning and found me sitting at the kitchen table with the evidence spread out before me, his reaction told me everything I needed to know. There was no surprise, no guilt, and certainly no remorse. Instead, there was relief, as if he was grateful that the charade was finally over. "I didn't want you to find out this way," he said, his voice carrying the same casual tone he might use to discuss the weather. The conversation that followed was surreal in its coldness. David spoke about our marriage as if it had been a business arrangement that had simply run its course. He explained that he had fallen in love with someone else, a woman named Amanda who worked as a marketing coordinator for one of his actual clients. He described their relationship with a passion that he hadn't shown toward me in years, and it became clear that this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, but a calculated replacement of one life with another. What shocked me most was David's assumption that I would simply accept this new reality and cooperate with his plans for an amicable divorce. He had already consulted with an attorney and had a proposed settlement prepared, as if my agreement was merely a formality. He spoke about custody arrangements and asset division with the confidence of someone who had already decided how everything would be resolved. I learned that Amanda was 28 years old, 7 years younger than me, and that they had been seeing each other for almost 8 months. She was everything that I apparently was not: spontaneous, adventurous, and unencumbered by the responsibilities of parenthood and household management that had consumed so much of my energy over the years. David described her with an enthusiasm that made it clear he viewed her as a fresh start, an opportunity to recapture the excitement he felt had been missing from his life. The most painful revelation was that David had already introduced Amanda to some of his colleagues and friends, presenting her as his girlfriend while he was still married to me. Our mutual acquaintances had been aware of his relationship for months, and I realized that I had been the only person in our social circle who didn't know about David's double life. The humiliation of this discovery was almost as devastating as the betrayal itself. Over the following weeks, as we began the process of separating our lives, I learned more about the extent of David's deception. The late nights and business trips had been elaborate covers for his relationship with Amanda. The Willow Creek project had been a complete fabrication, designed to explain his absences and justify his emotional distance. Even some of the clients he had mentioned were fictional, created to support his web of lies. David moved out of our house in April, taking only his personal belongings and leaving behind the life we had built together. He rented a temporary apartment downtown, while he and Amanda looked for a house to buy together. The speed with which he transitioned from our marriage to his new relationship was staggering, and it became clear that he had been emotionally checked out of our family long before I discovered his affair. Tommy struggled to understand the sudden dissolution of his family. At 12 years old, he was old enough to recognize that something fundamental had changed, but too young to fully comprehend the adult complexities that had led to our separation. David's explanations to Tommy were sanitized versions of the truth, focusing on vague concepts about people growing apart, rather than acknowledging his betrayal and deception. During his first few visits with David after the separation, Tommy would return home confused and upset. David had immediately introduced Amanda as his special friend, and Tommy found himself spending time with a woman he had never met, while his father acted as if their previous family life had never existed. The casual way David incorporated Amanda into his time with Tommy felt like another betrayal, and I watched our sons struggle to navigate this new reality. Amanda, to her credit, seemed to understand the delicacy of the situation and made efforts to be kind to Tommy during these visits. She bought him small gifts and showed interest in his hobbies, but her presence represented everything that was wrong with how David had handled our divorce. Tommy began to ask questions about why his father had never mentioned Amanda before, and why she seemed to know so much about his father's life while remaining a complete stranger to him. The legal proceedings began in May, and I quickly learned that David had been preparing for this divorce much longer than I had realized. His attorney presented a case that portrayed me as an unstable and controlling spouse who had driven David away through unreasonable demands and emotional manipulation. They painted Amanda as an innocent party who had simply fallen in love with a man who was already emotionally separated from his wife. David's narrative cast him as the victim of an unhappy marriage who had found the courage to pursue genuine love with someone who appreciated him. He claimed that our marriage had been over for years, and that he had only stayed as long as he had for Tommy's sake. According to his version of events, I had been so focused on my career and social obligations that I had neglected our relationship and created an environment where emotional intimacy was impossible. The most painful aspect of David's legal strategy was his challenge to my fitness as a parent. He argued that my work schedule and emotional state following our separation made me unsuitable as Tommy's primary caregiver. He presented evidence of times when I had been late picking Tommy up from school, or had missed parent-teacher conferences due to work obligations, conveniently omitting the context that I had been managing our household responsibilities alone, while he pursued his secret relationship. David's financial resources gave him a significant advantage in the legal proceedings. He hired Susan Chen, one of Springfield County's most aggressive family law attorneys, while I was forced to work with Mark Thompson, a well-meaning but overworked public defender who handled multiple cases simultaneously. The disparity in legal representation became apparent immediately, as Susan Chen filed motion after motion designed to drain my resources and force me into a settlement that favored David's interests. The custody evaluation process was particularly brutal. A court-appointed psychologist interviewed all parties involved, including Tommy, and assessed our respective home environments. David and Amanda had purchased a beautiful house in the Willow Creek neighborhood, the same development David had lied about working on, and they presented themselves as a stable, loving couple ready to provide Tommy with opportunities I couldn't match as a single mother. Amanda played her role perfectly during these evaluations. She spoke about her desire to be a positive influence in Tommy's life and her understanding of the importance of maintaining his relationship with me. She presented herself as mature and nurturing, someone who would never try to replace me but would simply add another layer of love and support to Tommy's life. Her performance was so convincing that even I found myself wondering if I was being unreasonable in my resentment toward her. The house David and Amanda shared was everything I couldn't provide. It had 5 bedrooms, including one specifically decorated for Tommy with all his favorite things. There was a game room, a home theater, and a backyard with a swimming pool and basketball court. Amanda had clearly researched Tommy's interests and had filled his room with sports memorabilia and video games that I couldn't afford to buy. During Tommy's visits to David's new house, he would return with stories about the fun activities they did together and the special treats Amanda would prepare for him. She seemed to understand exactly how to appeal to a 12-year-old boy, creating an environment that felt more like a constant vacation than a normal household. I found myself feeling inadequate and jealous, unable to compete with the lifestyle David and Amanda could provide. The psychological evaluation report was devastating to read. While it didn't explicitly recommend that Tommy live with David, it highlighted the advantages of his father's household in terms of financial stability, educational opportunities, and emotional support from 2 parent figures. The report noted that Amanda had quickly developed a strong bond with Tommy and that he seemed comfortable and happy in their home environment. Most painfully, the report included Tommy's own statements about his preferences. When asked where he wanted to live, Tommy had expressed uncertainty but had mentioned positive aspects of both households. However, his comments about David and Amanda's house were more enthusiastic, focusing on the fun activities and the attention he received from both of them. The evaluator noted that Tommy seemed to view his time with David and Amanda as more exciting and engaging than his day-to-day life with me. As the custody hearing approached, I realized that I was fighting an uphill battle against David's resources and Amanda's carefully constructed persona. My attorney, Mark Thompson, tried to remain optimistic, but I could see the concern in his eyes when he reviewed the evidence David's team had compiled. They had built a compelling case that Tommy would be better served living with his father and stepmother, and I began to prepare myself for the possibility of losing primary custody of my son. The night before the hearing, I sat in Tommy's room and watched him sleep, wondering if this might be one of the last times I would be able to do so. The little boy who had once run to me with every scraped knee and bad dream might soon be living in another house, calling another woman when he needed comfort or guidance. The thought was unbearable, but I knew I had to find the strength to fight for him, even if the odds were stacked against me. What I didn't know was that Tommy had been watching and listening more carefully than any of us realized, and that the choice he would make in that courtroom would reveal truths that would change everything we thought we understood about this entire situation. Chapter 2. The Web of Deception unravels. The morning of the custody hearing arrived with an unseasonable chill that seemed to mirror the ice forming in my chest. I had barely slept, spending most of the night rehearsing arguments in my head and trying to prepare myself for whatever David and his legal team might throw at me. Tommy had stayed at my mother Carol's house the previous night, sparing him from witnessing my nervous breakdown as I paced through our small apartment on Maple Street, second-guessing every decision I had made over the past 8 months. At 7 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was brief, but sent a chill down my spine. "You should know what kind of woman is trying to steal your son." Attached was a single photograph that made my hands shake as I stared at the screen. The image showed Amanda at what appeared to be a high-end restaurant, locked in an intimate embrace with a man who definitely wasn't David. The timestamp on the photo indicated it had been taken just 3 days earlier, while David believed Amanda was visiting her sick mother in Columbus. I screenshot the image immediately, my mind racing with the implications. If Amanda was cheating on David, it meant that their perfect relationship wasn't as stable as they had presented to the court. More importantly, it raised serious questions about Amanda's character and whether she was truly the maternal figure. David claimed she would be for Tommy. The timing couldn't have been more crucial, arriving just hours before we were scheduled to appear in front of Judge Patricia Roberts. My hands trembled as I forwarded the image to Mark Thompson, my attorney, along with a message explaining how I had received it. Within minutes, my phone was ringing, and Mark's voice carried an excitement I hadn't heard since we began working together. "Jessica, this could be exactly what we need," he said, his words tumbling out rapidly. "If we can establish that Amanda has been unfaithful to David, it undermines their entire narrative about being a stable family unit, ready to provide Tommy with a loving home environment." The challenge, Mark explained, was that we had less than 3 hours to verify the authenticity of the photograph and identify the man with Amanda. Anonymous tips were often unreliable, and David's attorney would immediately question the source and timing of this evidence. We needed more than just a single photograph to build a credible case that Amanda wasn't the person she claimed to be. I called Rachel immediately, explaining the situation and asking if her connections in the legal community might help us identify the man in the photograph. Rachel's paralegal training had taught her to think like an investigator, and she began making calls to contacts throughout Springfield County while I drove to Mark's office to prepare for the hearing. The race against time felt surreal, as if we were characters in a legal thriller rather than real people fighting for the future of my family. By 9:30, Rachel had struck gold. The man in the photograph was identified as Marcus Webb, a married real estate agent who worked for the same firm that had helped David and Amanda purchase their house. Marcus had a reputation in Springfield County for being charming and successful, but also for having affairs with his female clients. Rachel's contact at the real estate office confirmed that Marcus had been working closely with Amanda on several property investments, meetings that had apparently extended far beyond professional boundaries. Armed with this information, Mark was able to quickly subpoena Marcus's phone records and credit card statements. The digital trail revealed a pattern of communication and shared expenses that told the story of an ongoing affair. Hotel charges, restaurant bills, and frequent text messages painted a picture of a relationship that had been developing parallel to Amanda's engagement to David. Most damaging of all were the dates, which showed that Amanda's affair with Marcus had begun just 2 months after she moved in with David. The courthouse corridors buzzed with the usual pre-trial activity, as lawyers huddled with their clients and court staff prepared for the day's docket. David and Amanda arrived looking confident and well-dressed, Amanda wearing a conservative navy suit that projected maternal respectability. David's attorney, Susan Chen, carried herself with the self-assured manner of someone who believed victory was inevitable. They had no idea that their carefully constructed case was about to implode. Tommy arrived with my mother, Carol, looking small and nervous in his best dress shirt and tie. At 12 years old, he understood that today's proceedings would determine where he would live, but I could see the confusion in his eyes about why this decision couldn't be made by our family without involving judges and lawyers. He hugged me tightly when he saw me, and I whispered reassurances that everything would be okay, even though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. Judge Patricia Roberts called our case at exactly 10 o'clock, and we filed into the courtroom that would serve as the battleground for Tommy's future. The judge was a woman in her early 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She had a reputation for being fair but demanding, someone who valued truth above legal maneuvering. As we took our seats, I felt a mixture of hope and terror about what the next few hours would bring. Susan Chen opened with a presentation that was as polished as it was ruthless. She painted David as a devoted father who had endured years in an unhappy marriage before finding true love with Amanda. According to her narrative, I was a bitter ex-wife who was using Tommy as a weapon to punish David for having the courage to pursue happiness. She presented evidence of David's financial stability, Amanda's nurturing relationship with Tommy, and their ability to provide opportunities that I simply couldn't match as a single mother. The centerpiece of Susan's argument was Amanda herself, who took the stand with the poise of someone who had been preparing for this moment for months. She spoke eloquently about her love for David and her desire to be a positive influence in Tommy's life. She described the special bond she had developed with him, sharing anecdotes about homework help, bedtime stories, and weekend adventures that painted her as the ideal stepmother. Amanda's testimony was masterful in its emotional manipulation. She spoke about growing up without a father herself, and how she understood the importance of providing Tommy with a stable, loving family environment. She described her career goals and how she planned to balance work with her responsibilities as a stepmother. Most effectively, she expressed deep respect for my role as Tommy's mother and assured the court that she would never try to replace me, only supplement the love and guidance I provided. When Mark Thompson began his cross-examination of Amanda, the courtroom atmosphere shifted dramatically. He started with seemingly innocent questions about her relationship with David and her understanding of parental responsibilities. Amanda answered confidently, maintaining the composed demeanor that had served her well during her direct testimony. She had no idea that Mark was methodically building toward the evidence that would destroy her credibility. The moment of truth arrived when Mark introduced the photograph of Amanda with Marcus Webb. The image appeared on the courtroom's large screen, and I watched Amanda's face drain of color as she realized her secret had been exposed. David's reaction was even more dramatic. He actually gasped audibly and turned to stare at Amanda with an expression of complete betrayal and shock. Susan Chen immediately objected to the introduction of the photograph, arguing that it was irrelevant to the custody proceedings and had been obtained through questionable means. Judge Roberts examined the evidence carefully before ruling that Amanda's character and relationship stability were indeed relevant to her potential role in Tommy's life. The photograph would be admitted, and Amanda would be required to explain the circumstances under which it was taken. Amanda's explanation was a masterpiece of desperate improvisation. She claimed that Marcus was simply a friend who had been helping her through some personal difficulties related to the stress of the custody battle. The embrace captured in the photograph was purely platonic, she insisted, taken out of context by someone trying to sabotage her relationship with David and her potential custody of Tommy. Her voice remained steady as she spoke, but I could see the panic in her eyes as she realized how weak her explanations sounded. Mark systematically dismantled Amanda's story using the evidence Rachel had helped him gather. He presented phone records showing hundreds of text messages between Amanda and Marcus, many sent during times when she was supposedly alone with Tommy or attending family activities with David. He introduced credit card statements showing that Amanda and Marcus had shared meals at romantic restaurants and had even taken a weekend trip to Cincinnati together, a trip that Amanda had told David was a business conference. The most damaging evidence came from Marcus's own phone, which contained photographs and messages that told the complete story of their affair. Text messages revealed that Amanda had been complaining to Marcus about feeling trapped in her relationship with David, and had expressed doubts about whether she really wanted to be responsible for raising another woman's child. In one particularly devastating message, Amanda had written, "I love David's money and lifestyle, but dealing with his ex-wife and kid is exhausting. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it." David's composure completely collapsed as this evidence was presented. The man who had confidently entered the courtroom expecting to win custody of his son was forced to confront the reality that his new wife had been lying to him just as extensively as he had lied to me. The woman he had described as his soulmate and Tommy's ideal stepmother had been conducting an affair while living in his house and caring for his child. Judge Roberts called for a brief recess to allow all parties to process this new information, and the courtroom erupted into whispered conversations as spectators tried to understand what they had just witnessed. David confronted Amanda in the hallway outside the courtroom, their heated argument drawing stares from other families waiting for their cases to be heard. Amanda continued to deny the extent of her relationship with Marcus, but her explanations became increasingly frantic and contradictory. When the hearing resumed, Mark called Marcus Webb to the stand as a surprise witness. Marcus had been served with a subpoena during the recess and had no choice but to appear. His testimony was devastating to Amanda's credibility, as he confirmed the affair and provided details about their relationship that Amanda had denied under oath. Most importantly, Marcus revealed that Amanda had told him she was only staying with David for financial security and had no genuine interest in being a mother to Tommy. Marcus's testimony revealed the calculating nature of Amanda's relationship with David. She had targeted him specifically because of his wealth and stability, viewing him as a stepping stone to the lifestyle she wanted. Her affection for Tommy had been largely performative, designed to convince David and the court that she was maternal and nurturing. In reality, she found the responsibilities of step-parenting burdensome and had frequently complained to Marcus about having to pretend to enjoy activities with a 12-year-old boy. The revelation that Amanda had been lying about her feelings toward Tommy was particularly devastating because it undermined every argument David had made about their household being in Tommy's best interests. The stability and love that David had promised were revealed to be illusions, built on the same foundation of deception that had destroyed our marriage. The perfect family environment David claimed to offer was actually a charade performed by a woman who was actively deceiving him while planning her exit strategy. David's attorney requested another recess to consult with her client, but the damage had been done. David looked like a man who had been physically struck, sitting in stunned silence as he processed the complete collapse of his new life. The confidence and arrogance he had displayed throughout the divorce proceedings had evaporated, replaced by the shell-shocked expression of someone who realized he had been played by a master manipulator. During this second recess, something unexpected happened that would prove crucial to the final outcome of the hearing. Tommy, who had been sitting quietly with my mother throughout the proceedings, approached Judge Roberts's clerk and asked if he could speak privately with the judge. The clerk explained that such requests were unusual, but Judge Roberts agreed to meet with Tommy in her chambers, with all attorneys present as required by law. Tommy's conversation with Judge Roberts lasted only 10 minutes, but when they returned to the courtroom, the judge's expression had changed significantly. She looked thoughtful and concerned in a way that suggested Tommy had shared information that went beyond what had been presented in the formal testimony. Judge Roberts announced that she would hear closing arguments immediately and would render her decision without delay. Mark Thompson's closing argument focused on the revelations about Amanda's character and the implications for Tommy's well-being. He argued that David's judgment had been so compromised by his infatuation with Amanda that he couldn't be trusted to protect Tommy's interests. The evidence showed that David had been willing to ignore red flags about Amanda's behavior because he was more concerned with his own happiness than with providing genuine stability for his son. Susan Chen's closing argument was a desperate attempt to salvage her client's case. She argued that Amanda's affair was irrelevant to David's fitness as a father, and that the real issue was providing Tommy with the best possible home environment. She emphasized David's financial resources and his genuine love for his son, suggesting that he could learn from his mistakes with Amanda and still provide Tommy with advantages that I couldn't match. Judge Roberts listened to both arguments, with the focused attention of someone weighing a decision that would affect the rest of a child's life. When the attorneys finished their presentations, she announced that she was ready to render her decision immediately. The courtroom fell silent, as everyone waited to hear Tommy's fate. The judge began by acknowledging the complexity of the case and the painful revelations that had emerged during the hearing. She noted that custody decisions required considering not just the present circumstances, but also the long-term stability and character of the adults involved. She emphasized that the court's primary concern was Tommy's well-being, not the desires or convenience of either parent. Judge Roberts then delivered a preliminary ruling that stunned everyone in the courtroom. Based on the evidence presented, she was awarding primary custody to me, citing concerns about David's judgment and the instability of his household. She noted that while David's financial resources were impressive, money couldn't compensate for the emotional turmoil and deception that had characterized his home environment. But then Judge Roberts did something that no one expected. She asked Tommy to stand and address the court directly about his living preferences. She explained that while his wishes wouldn't be the sole determining factor, the court valued his input as someone old enough to understand the implications of the decision. The courtroom held its collective breath as my 12-year-old son prepared to speak words that would determine his future. Tommy stood slowly, looking impossibly small in the formal courtroom setting. His voice was quiet but clear as he began to speak, and his first words sent shockwaves through everyone present. "I want to live with my dad and Amanda," he said, his words cutting through the silence like a knife. David's face lit up with surprise and joy, while I felt my world begin to crumble around me. But Tommy wasn't finished speaking. He paused for a moment, glanced around the courtroom, and then leaned forward to whisper something directly to Judge Roberts. His words were too quiet for anyone else to hear, but the judge's expression changed dramatically as she listened. Her eyes widened, then narrowed with what appeared to be anger, and she looked directly at David with an expression that could have melted steel. Judge Roberts straightened in her chair and announced that she needed to speak with Tommy privately, once more before making her final decision. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as we waited to learn what my son had revealed in that whispered conversation. Whatever Tommy had told the judge was about to change everything we thought we understood about this entire custody battle. Chapter 3. The Collision of Truth. The judge's chambers felt smaller than they probably were, with Tommy sitting across from Judge Roberts at a mahogany desk that seemed to dwarf his 12-year-old frame. Mark Thompson and Susan Chen flanked their respective clients, while a court stenographer quietly documented every word. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation as Judge Roberts leaned forward, her experienced eyes focused intently on my son. "Tommy," Judge Roberts said gently, "I want you to tell me exactly what you whispered to me out there, but this time I need everyone to hear it. Can you do that for me?" Her voice carried the kind of maternal warmth that made children feel safe enough to share their deepest secrets, and I watched as Tommy's shoulders relaxed slightly in response. Tommy glanced nervously at his father, then at me, before taking a deep breath that seemed to come from somewhere much deeper than his lungs. "I said that I don't really want to live with Dad and Amanda," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I said that because Amanda told me I had to say it, and she said if I didn't, something really bad would happen to my mom." The words hit the room like a physical force, and I watched David's face transform from confusion to horror as the implications of Tommy's statement began to sink in. Susan Chen immediately stood to object, but Judge Roberts raised her hand in a gesture that demanded silence. This was no longer about legal technicalities or courtroom procedures. This was about a child who had been manipulated and threatened by the adults who were supposed to protect him. Tommy continued speaking, his voice growing stronger as he realized that the adults in the room were actually listening to him. "Amanda has been coaching me for weeks about what to say in court. She made me practice saying that I wanted to live with them, and she told me that if I said I wanted to stay with Mom, then Dad would make sure Mom lost her job and couldn't afford to take care of me anymore." Judge Roberts maintained her professional composure, but I could see the anger building behind her eyes. "Tommy, can you tell me exactly what Amanda said to you? Use her exact words if you can remember them." Tommy nodded solemnly, as if he had been waiting for someone to ask him this question for months. "She said that moms who fight too hard in court end up with nothing, and that Dad had enough money to make sure Mom would never be able to afford a lawyer again if she kept causing problems. She said that the only way to protect Mom was for me to choose to live with them, because then the fighting would stop and everyone would be happy. The manipulation described by Tommy was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. Amanda had identified a 12-year-old boy's greatest fear, that his actions might hurt his mother, and had weaponized that fear to serve her own purposes. She had convinced Tommy that protecting me required sacrificing his own preferences, creating a scenario where he believed he was making a noble choice rather than being coerced. David looked physically ill as Tommy's testimony continued. "Did your father know about these conversations with Amanda?" Judge Roberts asked, her tone carefully neutral despite the gravity of the situation. Tommy shook his head. "Amanda always talked to me when Dad wasn't around. She said it was our special secret, and that Dad would be disappointed in me if he knew I was worried about Mom. She said that strong boys don't worry about things like that, and that I needed to show Dad I was mature enough to make good decisions." The psychological manipulation described by Tommy revealed Amanda's sophisticated understanding of child psychology and her willingness to exploit a vulnerable boy's desire to please his father. She had isolated Tommy emotionally, making him feel responsible for protecting both parents, while ensuring that he felt too ashamed to share his concerns with either David or me. Judge Roberts asked Tommy to describe other interactions he had with Amanda, and the picture that emerged was disturbing in its consistency. Amanda had spent months systematically undermining Tommy's relationship with me while positioning herself as his protector and advocate. She had told him stories about other divorced families where children who chose the wrong parent ended up losing everything, creating a narrative where his choice in court carried life or death consequences. Tommy described how Amanda would quiz him about our conversations, asking detailed questions about my work schedule, my financial concerns, and my emotional state following the divorce. She presented these inquiries as expressions of care and concern, but it became clear that she was gathering intelligence that could be used against me in court proceedings. Most disturbing of all was Amanda's manipulation of Tommy's guilt about enjoying the luxuries of David's household. She had convinced him that his excitement about the pool, the game room, and the expensive toys made him a bad son who was betraying his mother's sacrifices. She then positioned herself as the understanding adult who could absolve him of this guilt as long as he followed her guidance about what to say in court. The portrait of Amanda that emerged from Tommy's testimony was radically different from the nurturing stepmother she had portrayed during her own time on the witness stand. This was a woman who had systematically groomed a child to serve her purposes, using his love for both parents as leverage to ensure his compliance with her manipulation. David finally found his voice, interrupting Tommy's testimony with a strangled cry of "Stop!" His face was ashen, and his hands shook as he processed the reality that the woman he had fallen in love with had been abusing his son's trust for months. The realization that Amanda had been manipulating Tommy while living in his house, eating at his table, and sharing his bed was clearly devastating to him. Judge Roberts allowed David a moment to compose himself before asking Tommy to continue. The boy's testimony revealed even more disturbing details about Amanda's behavior when David wasn't present. She had told Tommy that his mother was probably going to move far away after losing the custody battle, and that his choice to live with his father was the only way to ensure he would still be able to see me regularly. Amanda had also shared inappropriate details about the custody proceedings with Tommy, explaining legal strategies and potential outcomes in ways that were designed to increase his anxiety about the consequences of his testimony. She had shown him court documents and news articles about other custody cases, always emphasizing stories where children's choices had resulted in devastating outcomes for the rejected parent. The emotional abuse described by Tommy extended beyond the custody proceedings. Amanda had been systematically undermining his confidence and independence, convincing him that he needed her guidance to navigate the complex emotions surrounding his parents' divorce. She had positioned herself as the only adult who truly understood his situation, creating a dependency that served her need for control and validation. Tommy's voice cracked with emotion as he described how Amanda would comfort him after making him feel guilty or afraid, creating a cycle of emotional manipulation that reinforced her importance in his life. She would cause him distress through her stories and warnings, then position herself as his protector, and the only person who could help him make the right choices. Judge Roberts asked Tommy directly whether he had ever told his father about these conversations with Amanda. Tommy explained that Amanda had convinced him that sharing their discussions would hurt David's feelings and might cause his father to question whether Tommy was mature enough to handle the responsibilities of choosing where to live. The isolation Amanda had created around Tommy was complete and devastating. She had convinced him that his concerns were inappropriate, his fears were shameful, and his desire to protect both parents made him weak. She had taken a child's natural anxiety about his parents' divorce and had twisted it into a weapon that served her own purposes. David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo in the small chamber. "I need to speak," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I need to tell everyone what I've done to my family, and I need to tell Tommy that this is all my fault." Judge Roberts nodded, recognizing that David's testimony was crucial to understanding the full scope of the situation. David's composure completely collapsed as he began to speak, his words tumbling out in a rush of guilt and remorse that had been building for months. "I was so blinded by Amanda's attention and the way she made me feel that I ignored every warning sign," David began, his voice breaking with emotion. "Jessica tried to tell me that something was wrong, but I dismissed her concerns because I didn't want to face the possibility that I had been fooled by someone I thought I loved." David's confession revealed the depth of his self-deception and his willingness to sacrifice his family's well-being for his own emotional gratification. He described how Amanda had gradually isolated him from his friends and family members who had expressed concerns about their relationship, convincing him that their skepticism was rooted in jealousy or misunderstanding. The manipulation Amanda had used on David was different from her approach with Tommy, but equally effective. She had made David feel like a hero for rescuing her from her previous life, creating a narrative where their relationship was a romantic adventure rather than a calculated scheme. She had convinced him that his love for her was proof of his emotional growth and maturity, while his attachment to his previous life with me represented stagnation and cowardice. David admitted that he had known on some level that Amanda's affection for Tommy seemed forced and artificial, but he had rationalized these concerns because he desperately wanted to believe that his new life was perfect. He had ignored Tommy's obvious discomfort during visits and had dismissed my concerns about Amanda's influence as jealousy from a bitter ex-wife. The financial manipulation David described was equally disturbing. Amanda had convinced him to make expensive purchases and lifestyle changes that she claimed were necessary for Tommy's happiness and development. The house, the cars, the lavish decorating of Tommy's room. All of these had been Amanda's ideas, presented as expressions of love for his son, but actually designed to create financial obligations that would make David more dependent on her. Emotional support. David's testimony revealed that Amanda had been systematically undermining his relationship with Tommy from the beginning, always in subtle ways that he had failed to recognize. She would schedule activities during times when Tommy was supposed to call me, create conflicts that made family interactions stressful, and consistently present herself as the peacemaker who could solve problems that she had actually created. The pattern of gaslighting Amanda had used on David was sophisticated and relentless. She had convinced him that his guilt about the divorce was proof that he needed to work harder to make their new family successful, rather than evidence that he should examine whether his choices had been appropriate. She had turned his love for Tommy into a weapon against his judgment, arguing that any doubts about their relationship were ultimately harmful to his son's well-being. Judge Roberts listened to David's confession with the focused attention of someone who was witnessing the complete collapse of everything she had been told about this family. The stable, loving household that David and Amanda had presented to the court was revealed to be an elaborate fiction, built on lies, manipulation, and the emotional abuse of a child. David's final admission was the most devastating of all. "I knew Amanda was lying about some things," he said, his voice barely audible. "I knew she wasn't the person she pretended to be. But I was so afraid of being alone again. So afraid of admitting that I had destroyed my family for nothing. That I convinced myself that love meant overlooking her flaws." The courtroom chamber fell silent as the full scope of the situation became clear. Amanda hadn't just been unfaithful to David. She had been systematically abusing Tommy's trust and manipulating a vulnerable child to serve her own purposes. The stable family environment that had been the cornerstone of David's custody petition was revealed to be a carefully constructed illusion designed to hide emotional abuse and manipulation. Judge Roberts turned her attention back to Tommy, her voice gentle but serious. "Tommy, is there anything else you need to tell us about your time with Amanda?" Anything that made you feel uncomfortable or scared? Tommy nodded, his young face showing the weight of secrets he had been carrying for months. She told me that if I ever told anyone about our talks, she would make sure that both Mom and Dad got in trouble with the police. She said that fighting in court was illegal, and that children who caused problems for adults ended up in foster care where no one would love them. The threat Amanda had used to ensure Tommy's silence was particularly cruel because it exploited his deepest fear about the consequences of his parents' divorce. She had convinced him that his honesty could result in losing both parents, creating a scenario where silence seemed like his only protection against abandonment. Tommy's revelation about Amanda's threats explained why he had been so anxious and withdrawn during recent months. He had been carrying the enormous burden of believing that his words could destroy his family, while simultaneously being told that his silence was the only thing protecting the people he loved most. Judge Roberts asked Tommy one final question that would prove crucial to her ultimate decision. Tommy, if you could live anywhere you wanted, without worrying about anyone getting in trouble or anyone being hurt, where would you choose to live? Tommy's answer came without hesitation, his voice clear and strong for the first time during the entire proceeding. I want to live with my mom, he said simply. I've always wanted to live with my mom. I just thought I wasn't allowed to say that because it would hurt too many people. The truth that emerged from Tommy's testimony had completely transformed the custody hearing from a battle between competing households into an investigation of child abuse and manipulation. Judge Roberts now faced a situation that was far more complex than the original petition had suggested, with implications that extended well beyond the question of where Tommy would live. Chapter 4. The Reckoning. When we returned to the main courtroom, the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. Word of what had transpired in chambers had somehow leaked to the gallery, and the spectators who had originally come to witness a routine custody dispute now found themselves present for something far more serious. Amanda sat rigidly in her chair, her earlier composure replaced by the hollow-eyed stare of someone who realized their carefully constructed world was disintegrating in real time. Judge Roberts took her position behind the bench with the gravity of someone about to deliver consequences that would echo through multiple lives for years to come. The preliminary ruling she had announced earlier was now meaningless in light of Tommy's revelations, and everyone in the courtroom understood that we were entering uncharted territory. Before I address the custody matter, Judge Roberts began, her voice carrying an edge of steel that hadn't been present earlier, I must address the serious allegations of child manipulation and coercion that have come to light during this proceeding. Amanda Miller, please stand. Amanda rose unsteadily, her legs barely supporting her weight as she faced the judge. The confident woman who had testified so eloquently about her love for Tommy just hours earlier had been replaced by someone who looked fragile and desperate, as if she might collapse at any moment. Mrs. Miller, Judge Roberts continued, based on the testimony provided by Tommy Miller in chambers, I am referring this matter to the Springfield County District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential charges related to child endangerment and witness tampering. These are serious felony charges that carry significant prison sentences upon conviction. The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispered conversations as the full implications of Judge Roberts' announcement became clear. Amanda wasn't just facing the collapse of her marriage and her role in Tommy's life. She was potentially facing criminal prosecution for her systematic manipulation of a child. David's reaction to this announcement was perhaps the most dramatic of all. He stood abruptly and turned to face Amanda with an expression of pure rage that transformed his features into something almost unrecognizable. "How could you do this to my son?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the courtroom. "How could you hurt a child? How could you make him lie to protect you?" Susan Chen attempted to calm her client, but David was beyond restraint. The full scope of Amanda's betrayal was hitting him in waves, each revelation more devastating than the last. The woman he had chosen over his family, the person he had trusted with his son's emotional well-being, had been systematically abusing that trust. For months while lying to his face about her intentions and her character, Amanda finally found her voice, though it came out as a desperate whisper that barely carried across the courtroom. "David, please let me explain. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Your ex-wife was trying to destroy our family, and I was just trying to protect what we had built together." The attempt at justification only inflamed David's anger further. "Protect what we built?" he spat back. "You built nothing but lies. You manipulated my son. You made him afraid to tell the truth to his own father. You threatened him with losing his mother if he didn't lie for you in court." Judge Roberts called for order. But the emotional confrontation between David and Amanda continued as months of hidden resentment and betrayal poured out in front of everyone present. Amanda's facade of victimhood crumbled as she began making accusations of her own, revealing depths of manipulation and calculation that shocked even those who had already heard Tommy's testimony. "You wanted me to fix your broken family," Amanda screamed back at David, her voice breaking with hysteria. "You wanted me to make Tommy love you again after you abandoned him for months during your affair guilt. You wanted me to be the perfect stepmother so you could feel better about destroying his home." The admission that David had specifically sought someone to repair his relationship with Tommy added another layer of complexity to an already devastating situation. Amanda's role hadn't been simply that of a new romantic partner. She had been recruited, whether consciously or unconsciously, to serve as a bridge between David and the son he had alienated through his choices during the divorce. Amanda's emotional breakdown continued as she revealed more details about the dynamics of her relationship with David. "You knew I didn't really want children," she sobbed, her carefully constructed maternal image dissolving entirely. "You knew I was only doing this because I loved you and wanted to make you happy. But nothing I did was ever enough. Tommy still missed his mother. He still blamed you for the divorce, and you expected me to fix problems that you created." The revelation that Amanda had never wanted to be a stepmother but had assumed the role to please David cast her manipulation of Tommy in an even more disturbing light. She had been coercing a child to express preferences that served her own need to appear successful in a role she had never wanted, while simultaneously resenting the burden that role represented. David's attorney, Susan Chen, finally managed to restore some order to the proceedings by requesting a brief recess to consult with her clients. The legal implications of Amanda's outburst were staggering, as she had essentially confessed to the very charges Judge Roberts had indicated would be referred to the district attorney's office. During the recess, I found myself holding Tommy, close in the hallway outside the courtroom, trying to process everything we had just witnessed. My son had been carrying the weight of Amanda's manipulation for months, believing that his silence was protecting his family when it was actually enabling his own abuse. The courage it had taken for him to finally tell the truth was remarkable, especially considering the threats Amanda had used to ensure his compliance. Rachel arrived during the recess, having rushed from her office when she heard about the dramatic turn the hearing had taken. Her legal background helped her explain to Tommy and me what would likely happen next, both in terms of the custody decision and the potential criminal charges against Amanda. "The district attorney will definitely pursue charges," Rachel explained, quietly. "Witness tampering is a serious felony, and child endangerment charges could result in significant prison time. Amanda's outburst in court basically constituted a confession, so the prosecution's case will be strong." Rachel also explained that David's legal position had been completely undermined by the revelations about Amanda's behavior. Even if he wanted to continue fighting for custody, his judgment in choosing Amanda as a partner and allowing her access to Tommy would weigh heavily against him in any future proceedings. When the hearing resumed, Judge Roberts addressed the custody matter, with the decisive authority of someone who had seen enough evidence to render a clear verdict. "In light of the testimony and evidence presented today, I am awarding sole legal and physical custody of Tommy Miller to his mother, Jessica Miller, effective immediately." The relief that washed over me was so intense that I actually felt dizzy, as if months of held breath were finally being released. Tommy squeezed my hand tightly, and I could see tears of relief in his eyes as he realized that his ordeal was finally over. Judge Roberts continued with additional orders that would shape our family's future. David Miller will be granted supervised visitation rights to be exercised at a court-approved facility until such time as he can demonstrate to this court's satisfaction that he has addressed the judgment issues that led to his son's exposure to emotional abuse. The supervised visitation requirement was a significant blow to David's parental rights, but it reflected the court's concern about his ability to protect Tommy from harmful influences. His choice to trust Amanda with unsupervised access to his son had resulted in months of psychological manipulation, and the court was unwilling to risk similar situations in the future. Furthermore, Judge Roberts added, Amanda Miller is hereby prohibited from having any contact with Tommy Miller, directly or indirectly, pending the outcome of the criminal investigation into her conduct. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and prosecution for contempt of court. The no-contact order effectively severed Amanda's connection to Tommy permanently, regardless of what happened with her marriage to David. She would never again have the opportunity to manipulate or threaten my son, and the legal system would enforce that protection with the full weight of criminal sanctions. David's response to the custody ruling was a mixture of devastation and acceptance that spoke to his growing understanding of the consequences of his choices. He approached Tommy hesitantly, his face wet with tears as he tried to find words to express his remorse and his love. "Tommy," David said, his voice breaking with emotion, "I am so sorry for what Amanda did to you. I am so sorry that I didn't protect you from her. I am so sorry that I made you feel like you couldn't tell me the truth about what was happening." Tommy looked up at his father with the wide eyes of a child, trying to process complex adult emotions and motivations. "Dad," he said quietly, "I just want you to be happy, but I want you to be safe too. Amanda wasn't safe for any of us." The wisdom in Tommy's response was heartbreaking in its simplicity. At 12 years old, he had recognized dangers that his father had been unable or unwilling to see, and he had endured months of manipulation rather than risk exposing his family to what he believed would be even greater harm. David knelt down to Tommy's eye level, his hands shaking as he reached out to touch his son's shoulders. "I promise you that I will never let anyone hurt you like that again," he said firmly. "I promise that I will earn back your trust, even if it takes the rest of my life. And I promise that I will never ask you to choose between your parents again." The conversation between father and son was painful to witness, as it represented both the damage that had been done and the long road to healing that lay ahead. David's acknowledgement of his failures was an important first step, but rebuilding Tommy's trust would require consistent action over time, not just words spoken in a moment of crisis. Judge Roberts concluded the hearing with additional orders regarding therapy and counseling for Tommy, recognizing that the emotional manipulation he had endured would require professional intervention to address fully. She also ordered family counseling for David, both to address his relationship with Tommy and to help him understand how his choices had contributed to his son's abuse. As we prepared to leave the courthouse, Amanda made one final attempt to approach Tommy, apparently ignoring the no-contact order that had just been issued. Her desperation was evident as she called out his name, but court security immediately intervened to prevent any contact. The sight of Amanda being escorted away by security officers served as a stark reminder of how completely her life had unraveled in the space of a single day. David watched Amanda's removal with an expression of profound sadness and regret. The woman he had fallen in love with, the person he had chosen over his family's stability, was revealed to be someone capable of psychologically abusing a child to serve her own purposes. The realization that he had been so thoroughly deceived was clearly devastating to his sense of judgment and self-worth. As Tommy and I walked out of the courthouse together, hand in hand, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. The victory in the custody battle was overshadowed by the knowledge of what my son had endured, and the relief of having him safely with me was tempered by concern about the long-term effects of Amanda's manipulation. Tommy looked up at me as we reached the courthouse steps, his young face showing a maturity that no 12-year-old should have to possess. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm sorry I almost chose to live with Dad. I was just scared that if I didn't, something bad would happen. To you." I stopped walking and knelt down to meet his eyes, trying to find words adequate to express both my love for him and my admiration for his courage. "Tommy, you have nothing to apologize for," I said firmly. "You were protecting your family, the only way you knew how, and that makes you the bravest person I know." The afternoon sun felt warm on our faces as we stood together on the courthouse steps, and for the first time in months, I felt genuinely hopeful about our future. The battle for Tommy's custody was over, but the larger battle for his emotional healing was just beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, and no one would ever again have the power to make my son feel afraid to tell the truth about his own life. Chapter 5. New Beginnings. 6 months after that devastating day in court, I stood in the kitchen of our new apartment, watching Tommy help me prepare dinner with the easy confidence of a child who no longer carried the weight of adult secrets. The transformation in him had been gradual but unmistakable. The anxious, withdrawn boy who had whispered fears to a judge had slowly emerged as the vibrant, honest kid I remembered from before the divorce chaos began. The criminal trial had concluded just 2 weeks earlier. Amanda received 18 months in prison for witness tampering and child endangerment, followed by 3 years of probation. She would also be required to complete psychological counseling and was permanently barred from any unsupervised contact with minors. The judge had been particularly harsh in his sentencing, noting that Amanda's manipulation of a vulnerable child represented a profound betrayal of trust that demanded serious consequences. David had testified against Amanda during the trial, his cooperation with prosecutors marking another step in his journey toward redemption. Watching him on the witness stand, describing how he had failed to protect his son from emotional manipulation, had been both painful and necessary. His testimony helped secure Amanda's conviction while also serving as a public acknowledgement of his own failures as a father. The supervised visitation sessions between David and Tommy had evolved into something healthier over the months. Initially, their conversations had been stilted and awkward, weighed down by guilt and mistrust. But gradually, with the help of a skilled family therapist, they began to rebuild their relationship on a foundation of honesty rather than manipulation. David had moved out of the house he shared with Amanda even before the trial began, taking a modest apartment across town that felt more appropriate for his new reality. The luxurious lifestyle he had built with Amanda was revealed to be largely financed through credit and loans, and he was now working to rebuild his finances while paying for Tommy's therapy and supporting our family's needs. During our most recent therapy session, Tommy had finally been able to articulate how Amanda's threats had made him feel powerless and afraid. Dr. Sarah Martinez, our family counselor, had helped him understand that adults who manipulate children are responsible for their own behavior, and that his honesty in court had actually protected other children from similar abuse. The healing process hadn't been linear or easy. Tommy still occasionally woke up from nightmares about losing his parents, and he sometimes asked questions about whether telling the truth in court had been the right choice. But each conversation helped him process his experiences while building his confidence in his own judgment and voice. David's relationship with me had also undergone an unexpected transformation. The anger and resentment that had defined our interactions during the divorce had gradually been replaced by a shared commitment to Tommy's well-being. We weren't friends, and we probably never would be, but we had learned to communicate effectively as co-parents who both loved our son. The most surprising development had been David's genuine remorse and his efforts to make amends for his choices. He had voluntarily increased his child support payments, covered all of Tommy's therapy costs, and had even helped me with legal fees related to the custody battle. His actions suggested a man who was genuinely trying to rebuild his character rather than simply managing his public image. Tommy's relationship with his father was slowly improving, though it would probably never return to what it had been before the divorce. The supervised visits had recently been upgraded to unsupervised time, but David understood that rebuilding Tommy's trust would require years of consistent, honest behavior. During their last visit, Tommy had told David about his interest in joining the middle school debate team, and David had immediately volunteered to help with transportation and practice sessions. It was the kind of ordinary parental involvement that might have seemed insignificant to outside observers, but for Tommy it represented his father's renewed commitment to being present for the important moments. I had also begun dating again, though carefully and with Tommy's knowledge and input. Dr. Martinez had helped us establish guidelines for introducing new people into our lives, emphasizing the importance of honest communication and gradual relationship building. Tommy's experience with Amanda had taught him to be cautious about adults who seemed too eager to win his affection, a lesson that would serve him well throughout his life. The legal victory in our custody case had opened doors for other families dealing with similar manipulation tactics. Mark Thompson had used our case as precedent in several subsequent custody disputes, where children had been coerced or threatened by adults seeking favorable outcomes. The awareness raised by Tommy's courage had helped protect other children from experiencing similar abuse. Amanda's conviction had also led to changes in how Springfield County Family Court handled custody cases involving allegations of child manipulation. New protocols required judges to interview children privately when there were concerns about coaching or coercion, and court personnel received additional training on recognizing signs of psychological abuse. As I watched Tommy laugh at something funny he saw on his tablet while we cooked together, I felt profound gratitude for his resilience and strength. The boy who had once been afraid to speak honestly about his own preferences had grown into a confident young man who understood the importance of truth and integrity. The timer on the oven interrupted my thoughts, and Tommy jumped up to help me remove the casserole we had prepared together. "Mom," he said as we set the table, "I'm glad I told Judge Roberts the truth that day. Even though it was scary, it made everything better for everyone." His simple statement captured the essence of what we had all learned through this difficult experience. Truth, even when it's painful or complicated, ultimately serves justice better than the most carefully constructed lies. Tommy's whispered words to Judge Roberts had indeed changed everything, but not in the way anyone could have predicted. That evening, as I tucked Tommy into bed in our peaceful apartment, he asked me one final question that showed how much he had grown. "Do you think Dad learned his lesson about choosing good people to be around?" I considered my answer carefully, wanting to be honest while also supporting Tommy's relationship with his father. "I think your dad learned that love means protecting the people you care about, even when it's difficult," I said. "And I think he learned that you're pretty smart about judging people's character." Tommy smiled at this assessment, and I could see the confidence in his eyes that had been missing for so many months. He had learned that his voice mattered, that adults should listen to children's concerns, and that telling the truth, even when it's difficult, ultimately leads to better outcomes for everyone involved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.